So here we are in the last part of this video series, which is an introduction to the 10-week online Return to Health training. And on this webinar, which is a continuation of the previous one, I want to share a few success stories from people who I've worked with, and then give you details about the online 10-week training. And just to briefly recap, if you didn't watch the previous webinar, in the last webinar we talked about the journey that we have when we're on a journey to heal ourselves, and how we hit a brick wall, and then somehow we have a turning point, and then we do the work, and then we get our result and our transformation. And if you didn't watch the previous webinar, then I talk about that in a lot more detail, along with the heroine's healing journey. And I also talked about the fact that there are 3 steps to wellness. First of all, we have to understand what is causing the problem, and then we have to have specific step-by-step strategies to resolve the problem, and we need to implement those strategies rather than just understand them intellectually. And 3 of the top causes of illness, which most people do not take into account, they're often just focused on the physical aspect of things. But 3 big causes of illness are unresolved emotional hurts and traumas, and how that affects the body biologically and then creates symptoms. The fact that we don't know what we don't know, and we're unaware of ourselves and of what is creating the problem. And chronic stress. And all of these 3 things have to be addressed for complete healing. And we need to address our whole life, our whole being, which is why we say we don't heal a person, we heal illness. We don't heal a condition, we heal a whole person's life. So we need to take our whole being into account and our whole life into account, and this is what we do in the program. And then I broke that down into the 9 different core life areas that we could chunk things down into. And if you want to learn more about that in detail, then go check out my free 9 Pillars of Health Mastery program. And as I said, when we go on a journey, it's a step-by-step journey where you're led from one step to the next to get well. So let me share just a few success stories. Over the years, I've worked with hundreds of clients, and as a result of that, really started to see, okay, there are common denominators here in what creates illness, and also common denominators in what people need to do to get rid of their symptoms. Now, first of all, let me tell you about Fiona. Fiona is a mother of 2 children and a wife. And she was so sick that she could no longer take care of her children. And they had to move out of their house because she just couldn't function anymore. And they had to move in with their in-laws so that her husband's parents could take care of the children while she was trying to get well. And when we first spoke, she had been in hospital for about 3 months, having a lot of different tests done. Of course, physical medical tests to try and find out what was wrong physically. And even though she had really chronic symptoms such as ongoing migraines, weakness so she couldn't stand up, intense muscle pain, extreme fatigue, extreme pain, nausea, dizziness, and a whole list of other symptoms, even though she had all these symptoms, the doctors couldn't find anything wrong. And this is very typical and very common, and a very good example of what happens when you're looking for a physical cause to a problem which is not caused by something physical. And I'll just say that again. If we have a physical problem and we're looking for a physical cause, but the cause is not physical, then we're not going to find the cause at a physical level. And this is why people keep getting tests done and everything is showing up normal, but they know themselves that they don't feel right and that things aren't right. So she had had all these tests done in hospital and had come out of hospital because they hadn't found anything, and she was now bedbound by the time we spoke at her in-laws, unable to look after her children at all, unable to lead a normal life, obviously, if you're bedbound, lying in bed with the lights off most of the day because she couldn't tolerate the daylight, just really in a place of absolute despair, as you can imagine. And somehow or other, she came across my website, and we had our first root cause analysis session, which is the name of the first session that I do with clients. It's an absolute prerequisite and necessity because it identifies the root cause of the problem. And what she came to see for the first time ever was that as a result of her growing up and feeling that it wasn't okay to speak her truth or express her emotions or stand up for herself or even really prioritize herself or take care of herself, what she came to understand in that session was that as a result of her holding all her emotions inside, that had caused a biological effect within her cells, tissues, and organs to the point that they had started many years later to create symptoms. So this is a really important thing to understand, is that the symptoms which are created usually turn up later in life. They don't turn up when the cause happens initially, which in my experience, in 15 years of clinical practice, happens in the first 7 to 10 years of life. It's how we've been programmed or conditioned, if you like, in the first 10 years of life. And if you don't think you're conditioned or programmed, I can assure you are. We automatically model ourselves on the people around us, and we unconsciously create beliefs and habits and ways of dealing with our emotions or not dealing with our emotions and ways of behaving in our everyday life. And all of that is programmed in by the age of 7. So she had no idea that not speaking her truth, not standing up for herself, not being authentic, that this had such a profound effect on her body physiologically. And many years later had translated itself into symptoms because the body could no longer tolerate the stress that was going on inside of her and all the emotional energy that she was keeping trapped inside of her. And I shared about that trapping of emotional energy in the previous webinar when I shared my personal story. So after that first session, she was very relieved, as you can imagine, because finally, for the first time, she had an understanding of how our mind, our emotions, our energy, our physical body, and our higher self, if you like, they're all interconnected. And how if we don't address one of these aspects or one or more of these aspects, then it's going to put all other aspects out of balance. And obviously this was an extreme example, but a very common example. There are literally millions, not hundreds of thousands, but millions of people around the world who are bedridden and unable to function because they don't know what's going on inside of them at an emotional stress belief level. And they don't know that how they're living their life today, for example, people pleasing, pushing themselves, overachieving, not looking after themselves, doing, not resting, and a whole host of other things. They have no idea that this is actually what is causing their symptoms. So Fiona and I worked together for 6 months, which is actually quite a long time. Mostly I work with people for about 3 months and then they're good to go. But because her situation was so extreme, we took on a little extra time after the initial 3 months and we worked together. And by the end of the 3 months, she was up and about doing things and preparing to move out of her house, move out of the in-laws again. So she was up and about and most of her symptoms had reduced and she was behaving differently. She'd learned through the techniques that I teach how to communicate differently with people, how to express her feelings, how to manage her emotions, how to put herself first, how to not feel guilty for putting herself first. She learned a whole new heap of things about herself and about how to behave, which she never knew before. And then once she did that, the body no longer had to send her symptoms anymore because symptoms are a message and a communication, which is what we go into in the program. And within 6 months, she was back, or her whole family were back in a new home, back to life, back to normal life. And this is a very typical example of the type of person that I've worked with over the last 15 years. So another example was Sebastian, who was in his early 20s when we met, and he too was bedbound. He had had to move back in with his parents because he could no longer really care for himself, although that wasn't actually a good environment and was actually one of the contributing factors to his symptoms, because he grew up in a very toxic, abusive family situation. So when we first met, he had a long list of symptoms. He was bedridden most of the time, most of the day lying in bed with the lights off. And when we did our root cause analysis, we discovered that the trauma that he'd experienced in childhood from both his parents, physical trauma, emotional abuse, emotional neglect, which was actually very severe, this had caused him to hold all his feelings inside, to build, so that they built up, and this was blocking his energy, blocking his body's ability to function properly, and therefore created the symptoms. As we worked together, and we only worked together for a couple of months, he learned how to identify the emotions that were beneath the symptoms, and that is what people learn to do in this program. You learn how to read your body and how to identify the feelings that are hiding beneath the symptoms. And so he learned to do that. He learned how to communicate his truth. He learned how to create fair boundaries, clear boundaries around unfair treatment. He learned how to put a stop to unfair treatment. He learned how to say no to other people if they were treating him unfairly or something didn't feel right. He learned how to say yes to himself without feeling guilty. He learned how to put himself first, how to prioritize himself, and he learned to be able to tap into his intuition and to tune into his brains inside of him, because we have three brains inside of us, and so we have to learn how to read our heart brain and our gut brain. And through doing this, he automatically started to get better, and the body started to reverse the symptoms quite naturally. No medication, no supplements, just through doing what was right for him, being his authentic self, doing what was right for him. And within 3 months, he was out of that house, into his own flat, getting on with his own business, his own company, and back to normal. And now studying to be a doctor, and I'm sure he will be a brilliant doctor given what he has been through. And then there was Evie, who is a naturopath and also a pharmacist. And she had had really debilitating fibromyalgia for quite some time, as well as chronic fatigue symptoms and muscle pain and headaches and all the other associated symptoms that go along with these conditions. But she just couldn't work out, why is it that I have these symptoms? And when we did the root cause analysis, what we discovered was that she was being bullied at work by one of her superiors, but she wasn't able to say anything or do anything about it because she didn't know how to. She didn't know that it was okay for her to stand up for herself, to say no, to express her feelings, to say what felt right for her. She didn't know that. And so all this emotional energy was being trapped inside and was eventually outplaying as physical symptoms. And the reason that she wasn't able to speak her truth or act authentically at work was because of her upbringing. And as I said, it all goes back to the first 7 years. It went back to what happened to her as a child as she was growing up. And so she learned to suppress her feelings, to just go inside and keep everything inside, bury everything, swallow everything, which is, what most people do with their feelings. And now she was experiencing the end result of that, which was chronic symptoms. And as soon as she learned how to speak her truth, how to say no, how to create clear boundaries, how to tap into her three brains, how to understand what it was that she needed to do for her to maintain her mental health, emotional health, physical health, then her body started to recover very quickly, and she was able to move out from living with her parents because she'd had to move back in with her parents because she was unable to work, she was unable to earn, and she was able to move out. So within 3 months, she was out working again, new job, new city, new life. And the last story I want to share is a doctor that I worked with who was absolutely chronically ill by the time we met. He was not just ill, he was actually homeless. He had lost everything through not being able to work or earn money and not having anybody else to support him. And so he was actually living in student digs, and when a student had a room free for a week, he would move in and then he'd find another room after that. He was unable to work. He would lie in bed all day in the dark, absolutely humongous migraines, massive fatigue, massive pain, at an absolute, bottom of the pit place in his life. And as we did the root cause analysis, we discovered that he'd had a very, very traumatic childhood where he had experienced terrible physical abuse as a child, emotional abuse, emotional neglect from both parents, and that had traumatized him very, very badly. And as a result of that, he didn't know how to speak up for himself. He didn't know how to take care of himself. And so, as a doctor, he'd been working far too hard. Many doctors work crazy hours, like 18-hour shifts and then 5 hours of sleep, and then you're back on another shift. And he didn't know how to tune into himself to tell that his body wasn't happy with that. And one of the things that happens is that when we experience trauma and emotional neglect and emotional abuse in childhood, is that our self-worth and our self-esteem and our self-confidence goes rock bottom, and we simply don't know how to take care of ourselves because we weren't taken care of. So in our first session, he understood for the first time ever that the abuse and the neglect that he experienced as a child had led him to develop certain ways of thinking and certain ways of behaving and certain ways of suppressing all his emotions. And that this had ultimately led him to overwork and ignore his needs and basically slave drive himself just as he was slave driven as a child. And that this had caused the body to eventually say, you can't treat me like this anymore, and I'm going to take you out with chronic fatigue. And so he learned how to do things differently. He learned how to let go of the guilt and the shame, and he learned how to prioritize himself and how to stand up for himself and how to tune into his inner wisdom. And within 4 months, I think it was, he was back to a new job and living in a new country, and he had his life back. Now, these are just 4 examples of hundreds of people that I have worked with over the years. And what I can honestly say is that the bottom line reason that people especially have these chronic fatigue and chronic pain conditions is because of the trauma that they've experienced somewhere in their past that has not been resolved, and some form of an emotional neglect or emotional abuse, maybe physical abuse, maybe sexual abuse. And it leads us to create these limiting unconscious beliefs, such as I'm not good enough, I don't deserve, or people don't like me, people are going to reject me if I speak my truth, all sorts of beliefs sitting there in the unconscious, which then lead us to behave in a certain way. He had created all these unconscious beliefs and unhealthy behaviors, being out of touch with himself, acting inauthentically to his true self, and the body had no alternative but to create illness, to bring his attention to what needed to be healed and what needed to be addressed. So these are just a few examples, and I hope that they help you understand how I work. And just to share one more, which was from a client who was doing some of my self-help programs, and we never actually talked. So I just show this so that you can see what can happen and what results you can get, even if you were to do this 10-week training and you were not to come on one live training call. This is the sort of result that you can expect to get. So this lady says that, I want to share how Kim's Emotional Alchemy Academy courses have transformed my health and life. I've been in her EA, Emotional Alchemy Academy, and following her teachings for 4 months now. It's one of the best investments I've ever made in my health and self-care. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, degenerative disc, sciatica, and a host of other chronic illnesses about 20 years ago. I've been studying wellness and self-healing, seeking answers ever since. Kind of like Kim's stories, I'd also tried dozens and dozens of different healing modalities from all around the world. Some things helped a little, but my better health was still inconsistent day to day. I have even been through therapy for past trauma that didn't really help me learn to process emotions. The thorough assessments and quizzes really helped me to tune in to specific root causes of stress and symptoms. Kim is an excellent teacher and her methods are so easy to apply. Since using the tools she taught me, my health is also getting more consistent and stable each day. So I want to add that the programs that this lady was in was not specifically a symptom reducing program. It was more around dealing with emotions and stress, whereas this program here that I'm talking about now is specifically for reducing symptoms. She says, I feel much more calm inside, no longer fearing my emotions. I'm learning the benefits of tuning in rather than out when I experience emotions and sensations. My relationships with difficult family members are far less triggering. Best of all, my relationship with myself is far more compassionate and positive. My only regret is I didn't learn all this stuff sooner. It could have saved me years of suffering. I highly recommend the EA courses to anyone who has a health problem or is stressed or just wants to feel more joy and ease inside. There's no other emotional self-care course that comes close to what she offers. She delivers amazing content, offering extra bonuses and content far beyond what was promised. So the reason I wanted to share this story is that this lady was in some programs which were all about, as I said, stress and emotions. But because she was dealing with her emotions and her stress, her symptoms reduced. Because, as I said before, stress and emotions hide underneath symptoms. Or we could say that symptoms are a furtherance of the ongoing stress and unresolved emotions. So in this program, you're going to be learning how to identify what is the stress beneath my symptoms, what are the emotions that are beneath my symptoms. You're going to learn how to clear those emotions out and clear the stress out so that your symptoms can just disappear by themselves. And here are a couple of tips that I want to add in before I get into the program overview and the pricing. Instead of saying, why is this happening to me? In other words, why is this problem happening to me? Which is where we can often get stuck. We need to turn that sentence around and ask, what is it I need to learn and change? Now, this is something that I really had to learn on my own journey, because even though I was getting better, I was still blocked. I wasn't getting the progress that I wanted or expected. Even after I'd learned these emotional healing techniques, and even as I was still going through my own 3-year de-stress program, I found that, why is it that I'm still not getting the results that I really want? And what I realized was it was because there was more things I needed to change. There was things about my lifestyle that I needed to change, my habits of thinking, my habits of dealing with emotions, dealing with other people. There was still more work to be done. So if we still have symptoms, or if you still have symptoms, instead of asking yourself, why is this happening to me and I just want to get rid of it, you need to start asking, what is it I need to learn and change? And then you're going to be back on the right track. So there are 2 options here for anybody who has a chronic problem. And we need to ask ourselves, well, what will happen if nothing changes? What will your life be like in 3, 6, 12 months from now if you're still in the same situation with the same problem? And Probably the answer is quite easy. It's probably something along the lines of, well, my life will be the same, or it could actually be worse. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, what are the costs of not taking action and not getting what we want? Because if we don't do anything different, then we're not going to get a different outcome. And we have to ask ourselves, am I ready for change? And if not, why not? And if not now, why not now? And what are you going to do differently to get a different result? Because I'm all about helping people who are at that point where they say, that's it, I'm not going on like this anymore. I want to do something different. I'm willing to look at things differently. I'm willing to do something differently, even if it feels out of my comfort zone, and it will feel out of your comfort zone for some people, not for everybody. Some people, they're just so ready, it's just, there's no fear. But for some people, that it will be out of their comfort zone. And actually, one of the problems is a lot of the hesitation and fear we have over doing a program like this is because of unconscious fears that are running in the background. And so we sabotage ourselves doing the exact thing that we actually need to do. And I think I've talked about that. If you want to go and search on YouTube, search for videos on secondary gain, and then you will understand what I'm talking about. So a question to ask yourself is, what is it costing me to stay where I am? And I don't just mean financially. Yes, it's costing you to stay, because if you're not earning, for example, then there's no money coming in, you're not able to save, you're maybe spending money which you had put aside for savings, maybe you're having to borrow money. There is a huge financial cost. But there's more cost than that. There's like the cost in relationships. How is my relationship with my partner being affected? How is my relationship with my children being affected? How is my relationship with my parents or family being affected? And what is it costing you work-wise and career-wise? If you're stuck where you are now and things aren't getting better, then what is that costing you 3, 6, 9, 12 months from now, 5 years from now? We really have to get clear on this, because we don't see the ramifications from where we are now. And I can tell you from personal experience of the hundreds of thousands of dollars that I spent that I wouldn't have had to spend if I'd had this program. And the fact that I lost my mortgage-free house because I set off around the world to find answers. And yes, that was a choice, but I wouldn't have been able to do that trip without selling the house. And I can't say I regret that, because I'm here now. I understand this stuff, and that was a huge gift. But the fact is, I did lose my mortgage-free home. And as a result of that, with rent prices in Auckland, it has been extremely stressful to make ends meet sometimes. So, that's just the financial cost. But then there's the fact that I didn't work for 10 years. How much money did I lose by not working for 10 years? You just got to calculate what your salary is to work that out. And then I also lost out personally on having a relationship, because during my prime years of sort of relationship and childbearing, I was sick. So what is it costing you to stay where you are? And I really want you to give some thought to this. And if you're watching this replay, then pause the video and just ask yourself, if I stay in this situation for 3, 6, 9, 12 months, what is that going to cost me? And then we have to ask ourselves, well, how will my life be when I'm better? What will I be doing when I'm better? Because often when we're sick, we forget, we get so used to being sick that we forget that we could even be better. We stop believing we can be better. We forget what it's like to be well. And we don't even ask the question. We're focusing all the time on the symptoms, rather than focusing on, okay, well, when I'm better, I'll be back in my life, I'll be working again, I'll be traveling again, I'll be maybe having children or enjoying my children, whatever it is. So again, really think about this. How is your life going to be when you're better? And how would you feel if in 3 months from now, your life could be significantly better, your health could be significantly better? I can't give promises on the level of betterment, because the healing comes from within you. But all I can say is that for 15 years, I've been working with hundreds of clients, and the average statistic is in 3 months their life is back on track. So how would that feel? And really think about that.